only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to WallBuilders Live. It's Friday here at the intersection of faith and politics. That means we're bringing you some good news. Our Good News Friday program, our listeners really love it. They send in all kinds of emails, guys, about how much they like the pick-me-up, the encouragement of positive things going on out there, because there's so much negative that if you only focus on the negative, man, you get depressed. So I love talking about the good news. I love you guys talking about it. David and Tim Barton here. I'm Rick Green. And, guys, what are we going to start with?
Well, we're going to start with a little bit of history first, with what's called the Blaine Amendment. Do you know what a Blaine Amendment is?
No, but it sounds like good news.
It has something to do with school choice, doesn't it?
Well, it can in some ways. James G. Blaine was a Republican way back in the day, and what happened was he came up with an amendment, and it was proposed federally and then voted down, but it would have limited any kind of government aid to Catholic schools. And so it was really kind of an anti-Catholic thing in some ways. Here's what it said. No state shall make any law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and no money raised by taxation in any state for the support of public schools or derived from any public fund thereof, nor any public lands devoted thereof, shall ever be under the control of any religious sect, nor shall any money so raised or land so devoted be divided between religious sects or denominations. Now, what happens with that is he's saying, all right, none of this government-raised money can be used for religious organizations, religious schools, etc. And that was really kind of a shot at leave the public schools alone and let's let the parochial schools do their thing, and no public funds can go to that. Well, now 38 states have adopted that, and it was really a limitation, not against religion, but against particular denominations. But here we are now more than 100 years later, and when you read that, that says you can't use any funds for religious schools anywhere. Now, the Supreme Court and other places, Nyquist and other decisions from 30 years ago said, look, if you're getting textbooks or something else, you can give textbooks to Christian schools and public schools and charter schools and parochial schools with state funds, because they teach you how to read or how to do math or whatever, and it's okay to give that to other schools. But in the states with the Blaine Amendment, they've always argued, no, you can't do that. So in those states, it's been really hard to have school choice, because now you're saying we're taking taxpayers' funds, we're going to let parents use it at a Christian school or a Catholic school or a secular school or an atheist school or whatever, and some of those funds end up being used in religious areas. So for the last 30 years at least, the Blaine Amendment has been a real pain to get anything done on so many areas, where that, for example, in universities, you're allowed to fund Christian clubs on university campuses if you use student fees, and you can do that for secular clubs and elsewhere. But suddenly with the Blaine Amendment, you can't do anything if it involves religion. And again, that was not its intent. Well, one of the states that has the Blaine Amendment is New Mexico. And in New Mexico, the courts actually said, no, you're using the Blaine Amendment wrong. It is okay for the state to purchase books and instructional materials for students in private schools, including religious schools. It's okay for the state to make the purchase of those materials. So that ruling in New Mexico is a huge blow against the anti-religious Blaine Amendment. And again, the Blaine Amendment wasn't originally anti-religious, but that's the way it's been used for 30 years. So this really is a big pushback against the hardcore secularism that's been out there, to get the Blaine Amendment back to where that it's not limiting religion, it's just limiting the payment for one denomination, etc.
So, we've had a lot of good news with regard to school choice and education. I have a feeling this is going to be a recurring theme for us this year and next year as more and more progress is made in this area. You guys agree?
Yeah, I think school choice is going to be big. We've already seen the polling on it, and the numbers this year are really high. Plus, you're getting a lot more dissatisfaction with what's happening in school. You look at Common Core. Common Core is really driving the anti-government school movement. They don't like the indoctrination that's there. The more that comes out, the uglier it looks. There's a lot of pressure on state legislators. I've talked to several state legislators already this year who are looking for ways to create their own state test so that they don't have to do the AP test from the College Board, which is very Common Core oriented. The same with SAT, et cetera. So there's a lot of pushback against what's going on, and that opens the door for all sorts of school choice.
And then on top of it, all the newly elected officials that are on board with this. The reason we saw Common Core in Oklahoma, for example, overturned was because you had people getting up, elected officials getting up, understanding the significance of this, fighting against Common Core. But we have so many new elected officials, and we see that on their docket, on their agenda, that they want to see progress made in education, which is another reason we are hopeful for this year.
Well, and you look even in a state like, I believe it was South Carolina, with the state senator there that we talked to, and 2 years ago, when he tried to do something against Common Core, he could not get any support at all. I think there were only 2 senators who sided with him. And this time, it was unanimous. The entire Senate rejected Common Core. It was a unanimous vote. So there's a lot of change that's happened in the climate in the last couple of years. And I think this is going to be a really good year for school choice and the growth of parental empowerment. And that's really healthy for the country.
Quick break. We'll be back with some more good news here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. As Christians become more active in politics, they must remember to elevate principles above party loyalty. Perhaps the best illustration of this comes from the life of Founding Father Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence who served in the presidential administrations of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, each of whom was from a different political party. When Benjamin Rush was asked of his personal party affiliation, he responded, "I've been alternately called an aristocrat and a Democrat. I am neither. I am a Christocrat. I believe all power will fail of producing order and happiness in the hands of man. He alone who created and redeemed man is qualified to govern him. Like Benjamin Rush, we too must remain Christocrats regardless of our personal party affiliation."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. It's Friday. We're bringing you some good news from across the nation. What's next on our good news lineup?
We're going to Idaho, and their governor signed a bill that would effectively nullify future federal gun laws when he prohibited any of his state law enforcement from being able to act upon any federal laws that would restrict personal firearms or firearm accessories or ammunition, capacity magazines. So a really good step for Idaho for protecting the Second Amendment, the people's right to keep and bear arms. So great news for people living in Idaho as far as keeping and owning their own firearms are concerned, no matter what the federal government does coming up.
And we've seen that law now be introduced in a number of states. There's a lot going with this, that as the Obama administration has tried through executive orders and other means, they failed legislatively, tried to restrict the accessibility to gun and gun accessories. A lot of states have said, you know what? We're not going to enforce that particular law in our state because we are able to read the Second Amendment, and we don't think it's evolved, and the Second Amendment's real clear.
It's almost like the governor of Idaho said, I also have a pen and a cell phone.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is one of those, let's distinguish, very important to distinguish this from what some people refer to as nullification. David, you've got a great white paper on this issue of nullification. We tackle it in Constitutional Live as well, but this is simply saying, if your federal law is unconstitutional, we're not going to use our state funds to enforce it. You guys are going to have to do whatever you think you got to do, but we're not going to use our money to do it or our staff to do it because we think it's wrong.
It's just saying at the state level, we're not going to enforce this unconstitutional provision. It's not nullifying it. It's not nullifying the federal law. It's not striking it down. It's not acting like the Supreme Court. This is the right use of saying, hey, in our jurisdiction, we, it's a strange thing. Not only does the governor have a phone and a pen, he also took the time to read the Constitution. Pretty easy thing to do. And he says, I've taken an oath to the federal Constitution as well as the state Constitution. This is pretty simple stuff.
All right, good stuff, guys. What's next on our good news?
I'm going to go to Texas. And
that is good news.
There you go. Just going to Texas is good news.
That's what Davy Crockett said on the floor of the legislature when he left Congress. He was headed for Texas. And
I got a coffee cup with that. I can't exactly repeat the full quote.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't repeat the full quote, but it was good news for him to go to Texas, and we appreciate him coming. And as my Tennessee friends point out, he was a Tennessean that came to help us. So, all right, Texas took some help.
We take their volunteers. That's fine.
That's right. We'll take the volunteer state. This is a really weird one. We have a lady here in Texas, Jeanette Golden, who did what a lot of Texans do, and that is she put a 10 Commandments sign in her yard. Good thing. 10 Commandments, put it up. Except the Texas Department of Transportation said she couldn't do it, that she was violating the outdoor advertising laws.
What was she advertising?
The don't kill and don't steal. That violates the outdoor.
Unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional to advocate that you don't kill and don't steal and don't perjure yourself. So, and it's on her own yard. I mean, at Texas, we have bureaucrats, and we've got our nuts as well. And so here she posts this in her own yard, and the Texas Department of Transportation comes and says, you can't do this. And so now, does this same theory apply to, our local football team is going to win Friday night kind of signs? Or my kid's a linebacker, my kid's a cheerleader? It should, but I'll just about guarantee that they don't go after those signs. That was not it. And as a matter of fact, when she said, what's the problem? They looked into it and they gave her a legal opinion that says, well, her sign is on a section of the road where only commercial signs are allowed. Now, wait a minute, it's in her yard. I don't care what section of the road is. If the Texas Department of Transportation wants to control the bar ditches along the way, that's fine. That's their jurisdiction. This is her yard. And they said only commercial signs. So guess what? She did the right thing. She went to our friends Kelly Shackelford, Liberty Legal Institute, and they kindly sat down with Texas Department of Transportation. They said, oops, our bad. We got that wrong. For us to do this violates the First Amendment guarantee of free speech, freedom of religion, etc. So the good news is we won that case. The bad news is it had to come out of Texas, but even here we've got some knuckle-headed kind of bureaucrats from time to time, but did win it. No doubt, especially those local, city politic kind of deals. I mean, they love to tell you what you can do with your property, especially when it comes to signs. It's crazy.
And one of the things that, remember, we want to always encourage our friends, our family, is that utilize your freedoms so you don't lose them. And so one of the great things about this is if you believe in the 10 Commandments, you ought to get a 10 Commandment sign and put it up, because as much as we fight this in politics and government and even in schools saying, wait a second, we can't have that. Well, you can't have it in your yard. And so if we can't have it in schools, let's get it in every single one of our yards so that as kids are on the way to school, they're still seeing the 10 Commandments. We need to make sure we're making the most of our free speech and freedom of religion. And I want to go back a little bit. Something happened a few years ago. I think it was Adams County, Ohio, that the ministerial alliance there contributed 4 monuments of the 10 Commandments to the 4 schools there in the county. And they were put up out in the yard somewhere, the 10 Commandments. And, of course, the ACLU said you can't do that and wanted the 10 Commandments taken down. So the city residents said, oh, you don't want to see 4 copies of the 10 Commandments? No worries. Nearly 100,000 yard signs went up in Adams County with the 10 Commandments. You couldn't drive down any road without seeing 10 Commandment after 10 Commandment. So ACLU doesn't like 4 copies, so how's 100,000 grab you? I thought that was one of the best responses to that. You don't want the kids to see the 10 Commandments? Great. Let's have them see it 100,000 times.
I love it. Good stuff. All right, guys, got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. More good news here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Abingdon versus Shemp, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bible could no longer be an independent textbook in public school curriculum. Would our founding fathers have agreed? Benjamin Rush certainly would have disagreed. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he was a leading educator of the day. In fact, he was the first founding father to call for free public schools. Benjamin Rush declared, "The great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effective means of extinguishing Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible at schools. The Bible should be read in our schools in preference to all other books." In the view of founding father Benjamin Rush, the Bible was the textbook of preference for public schools.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Friday. We're talking about good news here on WallBuilders with David Barton and Tim Barton. Guys, what do you got next?
Well, interesting news coming out of the north to the south, and I guess it's not probably a surprise for most of us that have paid very much attention to the news the last year or two, but a lot of people are moving from the north to the south, largely escaping the tax burden and various other things. Florida has just moved ahead of New York in state population. They are now the third largest state, behind Texas and California. New York is now the fourth. What's interesting about all these people that are leaving the north coming south is that the Northeast has now lost 40% of its House seats as people have fled to the south looking for lower taxes. What's interesting about some of this notion, in Massachusetts and Connecticut, for example, they're down to 15% from 1983 to 2013 as far as their growth. They've only grown 15%, while the rest of the nation has grown 41%.
Hey, Tim, back up. Did you say they've lost 40% of their House seats?
U.S. congressional House seats, because they're all based on population, a portion of the population. The population is so fallen in the New England area that it has cost them 40% of the U.S. congressional House seats that they formerly held.
Well, and here's where I'm going with this. From Pennsylvania to Maine, okay, so up along the coast, back all the way in 1950, they had 141 House members. So they had 141 House seats. Today, they only have 85 House seats. So they had significantly more numbers all the way back in 1950 than they do now. Even with all the population growth that's taken place, they have grown at such a slower rate than anywhere else. They have, and not just grown, they've had so many people fleeing because of their tax burdens they've put on people. They are losing their representation, which is really good news, because they're the ones that so often fight and advocate for these incredibly liberal policies for raising taxes. And the people of their states are realizing this is terrible. We don't like this. We want to go south where we don't have to deal with this tax burden. So pretty interesting news, but very good news, especially considering they're losing the votes that supported such a liberal agenda.
I love all of America, but I have to say, man, you talk about good news. When the liberal Northeast has less representation in Congress, that is good news. And if anyone's wondering what that means, just, two words that you want less of in Washington, D.C. and Congress: Barney Frank. That type of representative from the Northeast. So this is great news.
There's another piece of good news that goes with this, is among all of those, when you take the 21 representatives that are up in the furthest reaches of the Northeast, the 21 are Democrats, except this year we got Bruce Poliquin elected. Bruce Poliquin is the one Republican, and he's not just Republican. He's pro-life, he's pro-marriage, he's conservative, he's a really good guy. I went up and did a number of events for him in Maine, of all places, where you have Susan Collins and Olympia Snow and et cetera. And so now not only is there a shrinking population, but those that are left, they've actually elected their first conservative Republican. And I will also point out that the newspapers up there said it was a direct result of churches getting involved and turning out their people. So that's good news that there is, with the shrinking population, you've got that. But the other part is, there used to be so many people from New England that back 15 years ago, they had what they called the Main Street Partnership. And the Main Street Partnership was a bunch of Republicans that we would now call rhino. That word wasn't used as much then, But these were your pro-abortion Republicans, high-tax Republicans, and they said, we represent mainstream America. And they were the ones who were always giving us flack because they would join with the Democrats. This is back when, after the 94 revolution, when Republicans at times only had 8 or 10 seat majority. And there'd be 15, 20, 25 of these New England guys that would join with the Democrats to defeat conservative measures. Guess what? That caucus doesn't exist anymore. The Main Street Partnership is gone. I mean, if you have a choice between a fake Democrat and a real Democrat, why would you choose a Republican who's a fake Democrat? And so you've got a shifting population base. It has driven the moderate Republicans out. It's now liberal Democrats, except for Bruce Poliquin, the one guy. So there's real shifts going in New England, and maybe even there's the pushback coming if Bruce is an indication of things to come.
Quick break. Stay with us, folks. More good news when we return on WallBuilders Live.
Hi, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders, and I want to encourage all the pastors out there with the unique opportunity that we're presenting at WallBuilders. We're doing a special tour just for pastors that you can come and learn more about the spiritual heritage of our nation. Not just seeing the sites, but understanding the significance of what they are and what they represent. We get to go through the Capitol at night, and we get to see the spiritual heritage of our founding fathers, of who we are as a nation, where we came from. We bring in congressmen that'll tell you about current legislation, about our religious liberties and freedom, and what's going on in Washington, D.C. If you're a pastor, or if you want to recommend your pastor for this trip, you can go to our website, www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a link that's for scheduling. If you click on that link, there's a section for pastor's briefing. There's more information about the dates, when it's going, how it's going to happen. If you want to know more about our nation, our religious liberties, our freedom, our spiritual heritage, this is a trip you want to be a part of.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us on this Good News Friday. Let's get some more good news, guys.
We were talking earlier about how you get city officials and local officials who think they want to micromanage everything. This next story comes out of Florida. And in Florida, you have a church there that is called the Church of Our Savior. And the city of Jacksonville Beach, and what happened was the Church of Our Savior wanted to build on its property. Really simple stuff. You got property, why not build on your property? But the city officials kept denying it a building permit. And the reason that they gave, this is their statement, quote, the church was not consistent with the character of the neighborhood. Now, first off, what gives the city the right to determine whether a church is consistent with the character of the neighborhood?
And what does that say about the neighborhood?
And what does that say
about that in there?
And what does it say about the city officials? That we don't want religion anywhere close to our neighborhood.
That's not consistent with the values that we're trying to uphold in this neighborhood. All your religious stuff, morality.
And so good for the church, they went to our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom and said, can you guys help us? And they said, love to. And guess who lost and guess who won? Church wins, city loses. I mean, cities like this, we have numerous examples where they want to micromanage these stuff. Best way to fix this is, number one, a bunch of people need to get together and run their good folks for city council, because you're only usually talking 3 to 6% turnout in city council races. Get a different city council in there that gets rid of the planning and zoning boards so that they can get different values in there. But if you don't do that, go get some legal group like Alliance Defending Freedom, let them whip it, but better yet, do both of those things. That any city council that says you're not consistent with the character of the neighborhood, it's time to have a change of the city council, and hopefully those churches will stand up and do that.
Absolutely. Tim, you got one more for us?
Absolutely. Now, this one is looking at abortion in America. One of the interesting things that the Center for Disease Control, in addition to tracking so many of the disease and really so much of the health-related data, every year they release their numbers, their statistics on the national abortion rates and the numbers of abortions throughout the year. What's interesting about this is if you go back to the 1980s when abortion was really kind of at its peak, in the 1980s, 1 in 3 pregnancies ended in abortion. So just dramatic, 1 out of every 3 babies was murdered. Well, that going from the high time in the abortion industry in the 1980s, we have now come to the low point to date of the abortion industry, where now abortion is down to only 18% of pregnancies are ending in abortion, which the Center for Disease Control is saying is the lowest that it's been since they've been tracking this data since Roe versus Wade in America. So this is incredible news. We've talked many times about how many of these newly elected officials have gone and all the things they've done and the bills they've passed in their states protecting innocent life. We are seeing the very real fruits of that with the lowest abortion rates we've seen in our nation to date. And we continue to talk about this, but it is continuing to be great news for the innocent, the unborn, and these really precious lives that God's given.
And you can expect some more of that this legislative session, because with the huge turnover we had in this last election in November, with the influx of new conservative folks, pro-life guys, you watch for new states that haven't been able to do things like this, that have turned over and have new leadership. There's going to be some more changes like this coming. Hopefully that number will go even lower.
And that'll make it even more good news for us to be sharing on this program throughout the year. This has been Good News Friday on WallBuilders Live. If you'd like some more good news, visit our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Click on the archives and grab some of those other Good News Friday programs. Thanks for listening today to WallBuilders Live.
We stand